extensive meditation before going to bed, pretty much like what we did today. And I was sleeping on his floor basically because I was sleeping over at his house, and I figured, oh well, maybe it'll be good for my back, and it'll straighten my back, and maybe at the same time it'll balance my chakras or some sort, some sort of thing. And during the night, I remember waking up to well, I've had sleep paralysis before, so I woke up during the night, and my whole body was paralyzed, and I felt this energy going through up my spine all the way to my head. And I remember my head shooting back, and I was trying to cry for help, trying to wake up Matt, and I was like, I have no idea what that was.
And you felt paralyzed for a while, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's a known phenomenon that happens. In psychology, they call it the hypnagogic state. It's when your body experiences this sort of sleep paralysis, and at the same time your mind drifts off into altered states of consciousness. Now, you have to be a little bit careful about this, because in those kind of states you may hallucinate all kinds of things and misinterpret them as spiritual experiences, so-called spiritual experiences. But there are other things that are happening, that do happen, which is not just your hallucination. So what happens is that when you enter into different states of consciousness, this has an influence as to how the life energies are working in the body. In different states of consciousness, the life energies in the body work in various different ways. So there are times where your consciousness is in a particularly subtle state, and because of that, accidentally, you may unleash a certain flux of energy in your system. So it can happen that many people, because they're in that delicate, subtle state of consciousness, they may accidentally awaken Kundalini or pranas, different pranas, life energies in the body. And it's very similar to what you experience. You may experience shooting energy up the spinal cord, and as it comes higher and higher towards the brain, your whole vision may become blank. You might see nothing else except light, because the energy is rushing to your brain. And in fact, there are some tremendous dangers that can happen with these kind of things, because as I've spoken with Matt before about, if the life energies are rushing too quickly up the spinal cord and too abruptly, and your system's not prepared to handle it, then you can leave the body. If the life energies are rushing too quickly up the central axis of the spine and towards a place which in yoga is called the Brahmarandha. The Brahmarandha means the cave of the divine. So just between your two brain hemispheres, at the top of the skull, there's a small gap of space. And that's what's called the Brahmarandha. When a child is newly born, if you touch the top part of the skull, you'll find that there's a pulsation there. That's the space which is called the Brahmarandha, the cave of the divine. So if your energies are awakened too abruptly and they rush up the spinal cord towards the Brahmarandha, you can just simply leave the body. Many times that has happened with people who have been practicing yoga, that in sleep they've actually left the body because their system was not able to handle such high intensities of energy. So that's why in yoga, tremendous importance has always been stressed to make your body and mind like a receptive vessel so that you can handle such intense states of energy. If you don't do that, then it's a bit like, imagine you're trying to pump 1000 watts in a machine which can only tolerate, let's say, 50 watts. What will be the result? You'll short circuit the whole system. So that's why those kinds of yogas which are more concerned about the life energies of the body, it does require a certain amount of carefulness. Usually these techniques are always transmitted secretly from master to disciple to ensure that these kinds of dangers would not happen. So, and that's not the kind of yoga that I've been giving you, because I don't feel that's necessary for you. The whole appeal of those forms of yoga is that if you're practicing it in the right way. It can accelerate the expansion of your consciousness tremendously, but it comes at a great risk for the reasons that I mentioned. So there are more safer methods, so-called safer methods, which usually it takes a bit longer period of time to get some results. But they still lead towards the same space.
For me, I just want to, just so you know, he didn't do any locks or anything. He just did cleansing of the breathing exercise we did today, with also and I also just gave him a focusing of the energy going up and down. That was it.
I know, but that's why I told you that even the most simplistic energy control technique, you should not be practicing this without the proper understanding, without being actually initiated into the process by a master who can guide you through it. Even the simplest technique, this is your misunderstanding. You think that as a technique which is simple is not effective and profound.
No, you said that a technique like that is safe. So I was like, okay.
It's safe in the way that I've transmitted to you, not for him, because he's not been to my classes before. I've not given him the preparatory techniques for that. So that's why I told you, you should keep your mouth shut about transmitting those techniques to others, because it can create irreparable damage if he doesn't go through the necessary preparation.
I do understand. I'm sorry. So just 2 months ago, when we both came here, we did the same exercises.
You see, usually if you reveal these kinds of techniques to others and they're not prepared for it, usually in yoga there would be, in those traditions which have been transmitting these methods, there would be consequences. And it's not just in yoga. In martial arts, for example, like we were speaking of the other day, the martial arts that has been imported from the East to the West is a huge distortion of what the essence of what the martial arts is supposed to be. Because the martial arts in the East, when you go to the master, he will teach you not just how to fight, not just how to control your body in various different ways. He will teach you a method to transform your whole life. So initially you start off through a certain discipline of the body. This helps create a certain atmosphere in the mind. And then you can start entering deeper and deeper inwards towards your enlightenment. So a lot of the martial arts were initially methods towards your enlightenment. They were never intended as just fighting competitions that you're seeing here in many of the martial arts centers. So it was a totally different phenomenon. The master would have taught you a method to transform your very way of experiencing life, your very way of being. And usually if you practiced any of those methods without permission from the master, there would be certain that these kinds of dangers that I'm talking to you about would not happen.
I understand.
So whatever techniques I transmit to you,
But you also transmitted to him the same ones 2 months ago, 3 months ago when we were together. It was the same most beginning exercises, the ones you gave too. So that's why
yes, I know, but I've not been working with him on a consistent basis.
Oh.
You've been coming to every class, and every class I'm introducing something new, something fresh that you can add on top of the other techniques. And it's all not just accidental. It's a very systematic process that's happening. So every single technique that's being done has a very specific scientific function.
I understand. I thought I wasn't
So
giving
it's
him
very
anything new.
precise. You don't tamper even with the smallest sequence in what's happening, because every single detail has a very specific function.
For example, Matt, there was a new when you taught me how to channel my energy from one chakra all the way up my back,
What?
and vice versa, that was something new for me. I think maybe that was what he was talking about.
Which one?
When we were doing a meditation, you told me to channel my energy from my lower chakras up my right and
Just
noses.
speak of the techniques out loud.
I didn't want to until he made me. I figured you could edit it or something. If you need help with that, I
Yeah,
can help
That's
you.
fine,
out.
I can edit.
Okay.
So I thought you gave him that before.
No, again, you don't reveal these techniques to anybody unless he's gone through the necessary preparation for this. So it could create severe consequences. In the United States, there is something which is known as Kundalini syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a certain, they're calling it, it's diagnosed now as Kundalini syndrome, certain psychological imbalances and disorders that have happened from the improper practice of Kundalini Yoga. So because the life energies create such a change in your mind and body when you're practicing these techniques, it is possible to create these psychological disorders. And you may become tremendously neurotic, paranoid, multiple personality disorder, schizoid disorder, you may become schizophrenic. All those psychological imbalances can happen. So, and in China, it's a similar situation, but that now in China there's a recognized diagnosis of something called Gong Psychosis.
Qigong.
Because, you know Qigong?
Yeah, that's what I was studying.
Qigong it's used as a lot of the it's as a basis for many of the martial arts in China. So it's known as Gong Psychosis, and it's a different method, but the idea is basically the same, to influence how the life energies are working in your system.
I've been giving him a lot of Qigong. I didn't know about that. I've been doing Qigong myself, because we spoke about the Tai Chi Qigong, and I was like, I learned the Qigong, I was giving it to Eric to do too.
You don't do these things again without the guidance of, even practicing by yourself is an enormously risky phenomenon. I never had a teacher, and I never had a master to guide me through the process. So I was in such a situation where I had remained as an ascetic for 6 years to investigate as deeply as possible into these methods of yoga. And I had to experience so many different trials and errors, finding out what works, what doesn't work. Many times I created certain imbalances within myself, and I had to manage somehow to find some way to correct the imbalance. And like this, if you want to be successful with these techniques and you're practicing alone, I'm sorry to say this, but it requires a very specific personality type. You see, not everybody can become like an Albert Einstein. Not everybody can become like a Leonardo da Vinci. These are all very specific personality types. In yoga, somebody who's come to his enlightenment without the guidance of a master or a teacher is known as a Pratyeka Buddha. And a Pratyeka Buddha literally means a lone Buddha. One who has come to his awakening without the guidance of a master or a guru in the process. But the kind of personality type which is compatible with moving, with expanding forth with these techniques is a very specific personality type. So for the average person, he lacks that very scientific and committed and one-pointed attitude where he can find out for himself. And when you're groping in darkness with your eyes closed, then naturally you're going to stumble here and there until you find your own inner light. So perhaps in the beginning a staff is needed, and that staff is a method. So these techniques that I'm referring to, they're usually not compatible with the average person who's practicing by himself.